Lara arrived at the whispering stream and just as the sun dipped below the horizon, bathing the surrounding forest in hues of deep orange and violet. The inn stood at the edge of the woods, its wooden facade weathered and cracked, as though it had withstood centuries of secrets. A faint mist clung to the air, swirling around her feet as she stepped onto the creaking porch. The innkeeper, an elderly woman with a glassy stare, greeted her with a voice as dry as the autumn leaves scattered across the yard. "Stay inside after dark," the woman muttered cryptically, handing Lara a rusted key. Before Lara could ask why, the woman disappeared into the shadows of the inn, leaving only the faint scent of lavender and decay. That night, as Lara unpacked her camera gear in her dimly lit room, she noticed the faint sound of water flowing just beyond her window. Curious, she opened the curtains to find the stream shimmering under the moonlight. But something was off. The water didn't flow naturally. It seemed to move in ripples, like whispers traveling across its surface. The sound grew louder, almost melodic, as if the stream itself were humming an ancient tune. Her curiosity turned to unease when she spotted something unusual. Faint, ghostly figures reflected in the water. Their outlines flickered and danced, too distorted to be human, yet undeniably sentient. Compelled to investigate, Lara grabbed her flashlight and ventured outside. The cold air bit at her skin, and the forest seemed unnaturally silent, save for the stream's eerie whispers. As she approached, the whispers grew clearer, transforming into fragmented words that seemed to call her name. The ground beneath her feet became softer, almost spongy, as if the earth were reluctant to let her pass. The closer she got to the stream, the heavier the air became, pressing against her chest like an unseen weight. She aimed her flashlight at the water, and her breath caught. The stream reflected not just her image, but a twisted version of herself, her face pale and gaunt, her eyes sunken and lifeless. She stumbled back, the beam of light shaking wildly as she tried to convince herself it was a trick of the light. But then, from the corner of her vision, she saw it. A shadow, tall and sinuous, slithering through the trees. Its movement was unnatural, almost serpentine, and it stopped abruptly as if aware of her gaze. Lara's instincts screamed at her to run, but her legs refused to move. The whispers grew louder, filling her ears with a cacophony of overlapping voices, each one dripping with despair. Then the shadow stepped closer, revealing a figure with hollow, glowing eyes that seemed to pierce her soul. The figure pointed toward the stream, and for a brief moment, Lara saw dozens of hands clawing at the water's surface, their translucent forms writhing in silent agony. Paralyzed by terror, Lara dropped her flashlight, the beam spinning wildly and illuminating the forest in brief, chaotic flashes. In those fleeting moments of light, she saw more figures emerging from the woods, their movements jerky and unnatural, as if they were being manipulated by invisible strings. The air grew colder, her breath forming dense clouds that disappeared too quickly, as though the darkness itself consumed them. Her trembling hand found the flashlight, and with a burst of desperation, she shone it directly at the shadowy figure. It recoiled, its form dissolving into the mist, but not before Lara heard a chilling whisper that froze her blood. "You've been marked." She turned and ran back to the inn, her pulse thundering in her ears. As she slammed the door shut behind her, the whispers outside faded, leaving only an oppressive silence that pressed against the thin walls of her room. Lara collapsed onto the bed, her heart pounding like a drum. She glanced at the window, half expecting to see the glowing eyes staring back at her, but there was nothing. Just the stream, glistening under the moonlight, its whispers now faint, yet filled with an undeniable promise they would return. The next morning, Lara awoke with a sense of unease that clung to her like a second skin. The events of the previous night felt like a fever dream, but the bruises on her arms from her panicked flight told a different story. Determined to uncover what was happening, she decided to explore the inn in daylight, hoping to find answers that might explain the sinister whispers of the stream. The inn was eerily quiet, its creaking floorboards and dim corridors reminiscent of a place untouched by time. In her room, Lara noticed something she had missed before, a small, intricately carved box resting on the bedside table. It was old, its wood darkened with age, and its hinges nearly fused with rust. A strange symbol, resembling a serpent eating its own tail, was etched onto the lid. The sight of it triggered a flicker of memory, a recurring nightmare from her childhood, where she had seen the same symbol drawn in the dirt by a faceless figure. With trembling hands, she opened the box, revealing an assortment of items: a lock of hair tied with black string, a tarnished silver locket, and a photograph. The photograph was faded, but the figures were unmistakable. Standing near a stream eerily similar to the one outside was a family. A woman, a man, and a young girl no older than 7. Lara's breath caught as she recognized the girl. It was her. She flipped the photo over and found a single word scrawled in ink. Bound. Her pulse quickened, and her vision blurred as fragments of forgotten memories began to resurface. Years ago, as a child, Lara had visited this very place. Her family had stayed at the inn, drawn by the legend of the whispering stream. She remembered playing near the water, humming a tune she couldn't recall but felt was etched deep into her soul. Then, one night, she had wandered too close to the stream, lured by the faint melody that seemed to call her name. She had nearly stepped into the icy waters when her father had pulled her back, his face pale with terror. That night, they had left the inn abruptly, her parents refusing to speak of what had happened. Shaken by the revelation, Lara clutched the locket and opened it, revealing 2 small portraits inside. One was of the same woman from the photograph. The other, however, was a face she didn't recognize, an emaciated figure with hollow eyes and a wide, unnatural grin. The sight of it sent a chill down her spine, and as she stared at the locket, she felt the air in the room grow colder. A faint hum began to vibrate through the walls, and she realized it was the same melody from her childhood, a haunting tune that seemed to echo from within the box. Desperate for answers, Lara began searching the room, pulling drawers open and inspecting every corner. In one of the drawers, she discovered an old, leather-bound journal with a broken clasp. The journal belonged to a man named Elias, who appeared to have been a previous guest at the inn. The entries were disjointed, filled with frenzied handwriting and desperate pleas. Elias wrote about the stream's whispers, describing how they grew louder each night, revealing secrets no one else could know. He claimed the stream was alive, a sentient force that fed on the pain and fear of its victims. One entry made Lara's blood run cold. It marked me when I was a boy. I thought I escaped, but it never lets go. It waits, patient and cruel, until you return to where it began. The stream remembers. Lara slammed the journal shut, her hands trembling. The pieces of her fragmented memory began to align, and she realized she hadn't returned to the inn by chance. Something had drawn her back, something that had been waiting for years. As the day wore on, Lara couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally in the corners of the room, and the hum of the melody grew louder, more insistent. When she looked outside, she saw the stream shimmering under the daylight, its surface disturbingly still. For a brief moment, she saw the figure from her dream, the faceless one, standing at the edge of the water. It tilted its head as if acknowledging her, then dissolved into the mist. Lara knew she couldn't leave, not yet. The inn, the stream, and her own forgotten past were tied together in a web of terror she couldn't ignore. The whispering stream wasn't just a place, it was a predator, and she was its prey. Nightfall descended like a suffocating shroud, bringing with it an unnatural stillness. Lara sat in her room, the journal open on the desk, its cryptic warnings echoing in her mind. The melody from the stream had grown louder, seeping through the walls, a siren call that seemed to resonate with her very soul. Her heart raced as she realized she could now hear distinct words in the whispers, disjointed phrases that hinted at secrets only she would know. It was as if the stream itself had reached into the deepest recesses of her mind, pulling out fragments of memories she had buried long ago. Suddenly, a faint knock echoed through the room. It wasn't the sharp rap of a visitor, but a slow, deliberate sound that sent a chill down her spine. Trembling, she approached the door, unsure whether to open it. When she finally turned the knob, she was greeted by an impossible sight. The same little girl from the photograph stood in the dimly lit hallway, her face pale and expressionless. The child clutched a worn teddy bear, its button eyes dangling loosely, and whispered, "You have to come. They're waiting." Before Lara could respond, the girl turned and walked toward the staircase, her bare feet making no sound against the creaking floorboards. Compelled by a mix of dread and curiosity, Lara followed, her breath shallow and uneven. The girl led her outside, where the stream gleamed under the moonlight, its whispers now a deafening chorus. Standing at the edge of the water, the girl turned to face Lara, her voice soft yet unnervingly commanding. "You must choose." Lara's gaze shifted to the stream, where she saw shadows moving beneath the surface, vague forms of people reaching upward, their hands breaking the water like ghostly tendrils. Then she noticed something even more horrifying. One of the faces among the shadows was her father's. His eyes locked onto hers, wide with fear and desperation, his mouth moving as if trying to speak. The sight struck her like a physical blow, the air leaving her lungs in a gasp. The girl's voice pulled her back to the present. The stream takes what it is owed. To save him, you must give something of equal value. Lara felt her legs weaken as the realization set in. The whispers had marked her as a child, but her father had sacrificed himself to save her. Now the stream demanded its due, and it wouldn't let her go again without payment. The girl stepped closer, her eyes now voids of blackness, and handed Lara an old, jagged mirror. The glass was cracked, distorting her reflection into something monstrous, her own face, hollowed and twisted, with blood running from her eyes. "Your memories," the girl said, her tone devoid of emotion. "Give them, and he will be free. Refuse, and he will remain. Forever." Lara's mind raced as she weighed her options. The memories of her father were the only tether she had to him, the only remnant of the life they had shared. Giving them up would mean losing him completely, erasing him from her mind as though he had never existed. Yet the thought of leaving him trapped in the stream's eternal grasp was unbearable. The whispers grew louder, more urgent, as if the stream itself were impatient. The figures beneath the water writhed and twisted, their movements frantic. The girl's presence became more oppressive, her small frame emanating an unnatural cold that made the air around Lara sting with frost. In that moment, another thought pierced her terror. What if the stream was lying? What if this choice was a cruel trick designed to ensnare her further? The idea of making the wrong decision paralyzed her, each possible outcome drenched in fear and uncertainty. With tears streaming down her face, Lara gripped the mirror tightly, her reflection staring back at her with a malevolent grin. The weight of the choice crushed her, her father's voice echoing in her mind, fragments of advice, laughter, and love. But now, those echoes were drowned by the relentless whispers of the stream, demanding her answer. As the figures in the water reached higher, almost breaking the surface, and the girl's gaze bore into her, Lara realized she had no escape. Whatever choice she made, the stream would take something from her, and in its wake, it would leave only despair. The decision weighed on Lara, but as she gripped the jagged mirror, the whispers from the stream changed. They no longer demanded, they coaxed, their voices dripping with a sinister allure. The air grew heavy, pressing against her chest as if the forest itself conspired to hold her in place. Then, a sound cut through the night like a blade, a deep, guttural murmur emanating from the woods behind her. Lara spun around, her flashlight trembling in her hand. The forest, bathed in the pale light of the moon, seemed to shift and breathe as shadows stretched unnaturally across the ground. The trees, once silent sentinels, now whispered among themselves, their leaves rustling in patterns that felt deliberate. The melody from the stream twisted into a dissonant hum, and from the corner of her eye, Lara saw something move, a flicker of motion just beyond the reach of her flashlight. Her pulse quickened as she stepped away from the water, the jagged mirror still clutched in her hand. The shadows in the forest were no longer passive. They began to take form, coalescing into indistinct figures that loomed closer with every passing moment. Each figure was featureless, yet radiated a palpable malevolence, their forms shimmering like heat waves against the cold night air. The whispers shifted again, no longer calling her name, but chanting something unintelligible. Lara strained to understand, but the words seemed to slide out of her grasp, like water slipping through her fingers. Then, she realized the chanting wasn't coming from the stream or the shadows, it was inside her head. The oppressive silence of the forest was suddenly shattered by a chilling laugh, low and echoing, as if it came from everywhere at once. Lara whipped her flashlight toward the sound, illuminating the girl from before, standing motionless at the tree line. But something was different now. The child's face, once blank and doll-like, had twisted into a grotesque smile, her teeth sharp and jagged. "You don't belong here anymore," the girl said, her voice a distorted blend of a child's and something much older, much darker. "But the stream, it remembers you." Before Lara could react, the shadows surged forward, their forms closing in like a tide of living darkness. She stumbled back, her flashlight beam flickering, as if the batteries were being drained by some unseen force. The air grew colder still, her breath forming dense clouds that hung unnaturally in the air before dissipating. Suddenly, one of the shadows darted toward her, and she felt an icy hand grip her wrist. The sensation was unlike anything she had ever felt, not just cold, but a deep, soul-piercing chill that seemed to sap her strength and will to fight. The mirror in her hand began to vibrate violently, the cracks in its surface glowing faintly with an eerie blue light. In her terror, Lara swung the mirror at the shadow, and the glowing cracks released a burst of energy, causing the shadow to recoil with an ear-piercing screech. The light from the mirror flickered like a dying flame, but it was enough to buy her a few precious moments. She turned and ran toward the inn, the whispers now a cacophony that drowned out even the pounding of her own heart. As she neared the safety of the building, the shadows didn't relent. They followed her, their forms stretching and twisting unnaturally, their movements jerky yet purposeful. One of them slammed against the door just as she locked it behind her, the force rattling the entire frame. Inside, the air was no less oppressive. The whispers seeped through the walls, now mixed with faint sobs and agonized wails. The mirror in her hand had stopped glowing, but now emitted a faint hum, as if alive. Lara collapsed against the door, her breath shallow and ragged. She scanned the room, searching for anything that could help her understand what was happening. Her eyes landed on the journal, its pages now open to a section she hadn't read before. The handwriting was different, more jagged and erratic, as though written in a frenzy. The words leaped off the page. The shadows are its servants, but the stream itself is the master. It feeds on fear, thrives on despair. Do not trust what you see. It will twist everything against you. At that moment, Lara realized the stream wasn't merely calling her. It was toying with her. The shadows, the whispers, even the distorted reflections, they were all part of its game, meant to break her will and force her to surrender. But surrender to what? The mirror in her hand grew heavier, the hum intensifying as if it was reacting to her thoughts. The shadows outside pounded against the walls, their silhouettes visible through the thin curtains, shifting and writhing in grotesque forms. Lara knew the game wasn't over. It had only just begun. Lara sat on the floor of her room, the mirror trembling in her hands as though alive, its faint hum now a steady vibration that reverberated through her bones. The whispers had grown louder, morphing into voices she recognized but couldn't place. They seemed to belong to people from her past, her father, a childhood friend, even a long-forgotten teacher, each voice laced with sorrow and accusation. The voices spoke not in unison, but in a chaotic symphony that clawed at her sanity. Suddenly, the mirror's cracked surface flickered, showing a vision that froze Lara's breath. In its fractured depths, she saw herself standing by the stream, her reflection distorted and broken. Her lips moved, speaking words she couldn't hear, but the expression on her face was unmistakable, desperation mixed with terror. As she stared, the vision shifted, and the stream in the reflection began to churn violently, the water blackening as spectral hands clawed their way to the surface. "Don't look," a voice hissed from the shadows of the room, low and guttural, like nails dragged across stone. Lara whipped her head around, but no one was there. The voice came again, closer this time. "It will take you." Lara felt an unbearable chill crawl down her spine. She tried to avert her gaze from the mirror, but it held her in its grip, as though the object itself refused to let her go. The whispers began to warp, transforming into faint cries for help. Each cry was accompanied by fleeting images in the mirror. A woman clutching a bloodied teddy bear, a man sinking into the stream's dark waters, and a child screaming as shadows engulfed them. Her breath quickened as she realized the mirror wasn't just showing her visions, it was pulling her into them. The room around her began to blur and darken, its edges fraying like an old photograph. The walls seemed to stretch, the ceiling retreating into a void of shadows. The hum of the mirror grew deafening, drowning out her own thoughts as the visions became sharper, more vivid. The stream appeared again, but this time Lara saw herself standing on its bank, the spectral hands reaching for her ankles. Her reflection smiled, a cruel and alien grin, and spoke in a voice that wasn't hers. "Come closer. You know you want to see." The temptation was overwhelming. Despite her terror, Lara felt a pull, an almost magnetic urge to let go of her fear and surrender. The whispers, now soothing and melodic, began to lull her into compliance. They promised answers, clarity, and even salvation. "Step into the water," they cooed. "Everything will be revealed." But as she reached toward the mirror, the vision shifted again, and this time she saw something horrifying. Her father's face, pale and bloated, his eyes sunken and lifeless, staring at her from beneath the water. He mouthed a single word, "Run." The image shattered her trance, and she recoiled, dropping the mirror. It hit the floor with a metallic clang, its glow dimming but not extinguishing. The room snapped back into focus, but the oppressive atmosphere remained, thick with a sense of malevolence that seemed to crawl under her skin. Lara staggered to her feet, her legs trembling. She could still feel the pull of the mirror, its whispers like an itch in the back of her mind. The temptation hadn't faded, it had burrowed deeper, embedding itself within her thoughts. Every step away from the mirror felt like dragging herself through quicksand, the urge to turn back gnawing at her resolve. She stumbled toward the door, but before she could reach it, the shadows in the room began to shift again. They coiled and writhed like living things, forming shapes that resembled grotesque, elongated faces. Each face was frozen in a silent scream, their hollow eyes watching her intently. "Why fight it?" one of the faces rasped, its voice slithering into her ears like cold venom. "You're already ours." The words ignited a surge of panic in Lara. Her mind raced as she tried to find an anchor, something to hold on to that wasn't fear. Her father's warning replayed in her head, his lifeless face a stark reminder of what awaited her if she gave in. But the voices, the whispers, and the mirror all worked against her, their combined force threatening to unravel her sanity. As the faces in the shadows drew closer, their whispers blending into a single, haunting chant, Lara realized the truth. The stream didn't need to drag her into its depths. It was breaking her from the inside, using her own fear as a weapon. It wasn't just a battle for survival. It was a battle for her soul. And the stream was winning. The air in the room grew suffocating, pressing against Lara's chest like an invisible weight. The shadows continued to writhe along the walls, their grotesque faces now merging into one horrifying form. A towering, indistinct figure with hollow, glowing eyes that radiated malice. The mirror, now lying on the floor, pulsed with an unnatural light, its cracked surface glowing faintly, as if it were alive. Every instinct told Lara to flee, but she knew there was nowhere to run. The whispers changed again, their tone shifting from alluring to accusatory. They hissed her failures, her regrets, her fears. Each word struck like a blade, cutting through her resolve and dragging her deeper into despair. "You abandoned him," the voices sneered, conjuring an image of her father's lifeless face beneath the black waters of the stream. "You've always been weak." Lara dropped to her knees, her hands clutching her ears in a futile attempt to block out the voices. Tears streamed down her face as she screamed into the void, her voice swallowed by the oppressive darkness. The shadows around her laughed, a deep, guttural sound that echoed in her mind. Suddenly, the glow of the mirror intensified, casting the room in an eerie, flickering light. In its fractured surface, she saw a new vision, herself standing at the edge of the stream, surrounded by the spectral hands reaching from the water. But this time, she wasn't alone. Behind her stood the shadowy figure, its glowing eyes fixed on her as it whispered into her ear. "You've been marked since the beginning," the figure said, its voice a chilling blend of whispers and growls. "You belong to us." The realization hit her like a thunderclap. The stream hadn't just lured her here, it had been waiting for her all along, feeding on her fear and despair to draw her back. Everything, her childhood memory, the strange pull to return to this place, even the whispers, had been orchestrated by the stream. But why? The mirror offered the answer. The image shifted again, showing Lara as a child, standing by the stream with her father. In the vision, her father knelt by the water, speaking in hushed tones to someone, or something, beneath its surface. His expression was one of terror and desperation. Lara's younger self reached for the water, only to be pulled back by her father. But as he dragged her away, she saw it, the shadowy figure emerging from the stream, its eyes locking onto hers. The vision faded, and Lara realized the truth. Her father had struck a bargain with the stream, sacrificing himself to protect her. But the bargain had come with a cost. She had been marked, destined to return to this cursed place. The whispers grew louder, their cadence feverish, as the shadowy figure in the room stepped closer. Its glowing eyes bore into hers, and for the first time, she felt its full presence, a cold, suffocating force that seemed to seep into her very being. "You can end this," it said, its voice reverberating through the room. "Take your place in the water, and the torment will cease. Refuse, and they will all suffer." Lara's mind raced. She knew the entity wasn't lying. The stream was alive, a sentient force that fed on despair, and it had already claimed countless souls, including her father's. If she surrendered, it would take her, but it might spare others. But as she looked at the mirror again, a new possibility flickered in her mind. The glowing cracks in its surface seemed to pulse in response to her thoughts, as if offering a glimmer of hope. She picked it up, her hands trembling, and pointed it toward the shadowy figure. "What if I refuse?" she said, her voice shaking but defiant. The entity recoiled slightly, its form flickering like a dying flame. The whispers around her faltered, their rhythm disrupted. The mirror's light grew stronger, casting the room in a blinding glow. The figure roared, a sound that shook the walls and sent waves of icy air crashing into her. "You dare defy the stream?" it bellowed, its voice laced with fury and fear. Summoning every ounce of courage, Lara held the mirror higher. The light from the cracks burst forth, illuminating the room and banishing the shadows to the edges. The entity screamed, its form unraveling into tendrils of darkness that writhed and twisted before dissipating into the air. The whispers fell silent, leaving a deafening stillness in their wake. For a moment, Lara thought she had won. But then she felt it, a cold, wet hand gripping her ankle. She looked down to see the spectral hands of the stream rising through the floorboards, their translucent forms dragging her toward the glowing mirror. The stream wasn't done with her yet. The spectral hands gripped Lara's ankles with an icy strength that froze her breath in her chest. No matter how hard she struggled, their grip tightened, pulling her closer to the mirror that now glowed with an otherworldly intensity. The cracks on its surface pulsed like veins, emanating a light that flickered between cold white and deep crimson, casting terrifying shadows across the room. The whispers returned, but now they were a cacophony of screams, accusations, and commands, urging her to surrender. "You cannot escape," the voices hissed, their words cutting through her mind like jagged glass. "The stream owns you. You are its to consume." Lara clawed at the floor, her nails scraping against the splintered wood as the hands dragged her relentlessly toward the mirror. Desperation surged through her veins, and she kicked wildly, managing to free one leg. The mirror's glow flickered, and the whispers faltered for a split second, but the remaining hands only tightened their grip, pulling harder. As her fingers brushed against the jagged edge of the journal that had fallen to the floor, a thought struck her. The journal's final pages had described the stream as a predator that thrived on fear and submission. What if its power came not from the physical realm, but from her mind? She gripped the journal tightly, her thoughts racing as the spectral hands dragged her closer to the mirror's pulsating surface. "Is this all you've got?" Lara shouted, her voice breaking but defiant. The room seemed to tremble at her words, the shadows on the walls flickering like candlelight caught in a storm. The whispers roared louder, as if angered by her defiance. A guttural laugh echoed through the room, and the shadowy figure reappeared, its towering form looming over her. Its hollow eyes glowed like twin moons, and its voice slithered into her ears. "You think you can fight the inevitable? You are marked. Your resistance only feeds us." Lara stared at the figure, her body trembling, but her mind racing. The mirror, the whispers, the shadows, all of them had worked to break her spirit, to make her submit. But if the stream thrived on fear, then perhaps defiance was her weapon. "You don't own me," she whispered, though her voice trembled. She tightened her grip on the journal and pulled herself to her knees, her gaze fixed on the mirror. "You've been feeding on my fear, my doubt, but you'll get nothing more." The glow of the mirror pulsed erratically, and the spectral hands recoiled slightly, their forms wavering. The shadowy figure's grin faltered, and it hissed, "You cannot deny what you are. You belong to the stream." Lara forced herself to her feet, the weight of her fear pressing down on her like a physical force. She raised the journal, its edges glowing faintly as if it, too, resisted the stream's power. "Maybe I was marked," she said, her voice gaining strength. "But I decide what happens next." With a surge of adrenaline, she hurled the journal into the mirror. The room exploded with light, the cracks in the mirror shattering outward in a burst of radiant energy. The spectral hands dissolved into mist, their icy grip vanishing, and the shadowy figure shrieked, its form writhing and distorting as the light consumed it. The whispers turned to screams, then faded into silence. The oppressive weight in the air lifted, and the room was bathed in an unnatural stillness. Lara collapsed to the floor, her chest heaving as she tried to catch her breath. The mirror lay in shards, its once glowing surface now dull and lifeless. The shadowy figure was gone, its presence erased, but the memory of its hollow eyes lingered in Lara's mind. She crawled to the window and peered outside. The stream, once shimmering with malevolence, now lay still, its surface reflecting only the moonlight. But as she stared, a faint ripple broke the surface, and a soft, familiar voice echoed faintly in her mind. "This isn't over." Lara turned away, her body trembling, but her resolve unbroken. She didn't know if the stream was truly defeated or merely biding its time. But one thing was certain, she had faced its terror and survived. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the faint sound of Lara's ragged breathing. The shattered pieces of the mirror lay scattered around her, their edges catching the dim light like jagged shards of frozen moonlight. The oppressive atmosphere had lifted, but the lingering chill in the air whispered that the stream's presence was far from gone. Lara leaned against the wall, her body trembling from exhaustion, her mind replaying the terrifying events over and over like a broken reel. She glanced at the remnants of the mirror, half expecting the spectral hands to re-emerge or the shadowy figure to reform. But the shards remained lifeless, devoid of the eerie glow they once held. For the first time since arriving at the inn, she felt a fragile glimmer of hope. Yet, deep inside, Lara couldn't shake the feeling that she hadn't escaped entirely. The stream wasn't defeated, it was waiting. As the first light of dawn crept through the cracked window, Lara forced herself to her feet. Her legs were weak, and every muscle in her body ached, but she knew she couldn't stay. She gathered her belongings in a daze, her hands trembling as she stuffed them into her bag. The inn felt unnaturally quiet now, as though it, too, was holding its breath. The once oppressive whispers were gone, but in their absence was an eerie void that felt just as menacing. Before leaving, she hesitated at the door and glanced back at the room. The journal was gone, its pages consumed in the burst of energy that destroyed the mirror. But something else had taken its place. On the desk where the journal once sat was a single, water-stained page. Lara approached it cautiously, her heart pounding. The page was blank, save for one line scrawled in faint, watery ink. "You can never leave what is part of you." A shiver ran down her spine as the words seemed to seep into her mind, their meaning unclear yet deeply unsettling. She stuffed the page into her bag and left the room, the wooden floor creaking beneath her every step. As she exited the inn, the morning light did little to dispel the unease that clung to her. The forest surrounding the stream was bathed in a soft golden glow, yet the trees seemed to lean in, their gnarled branches casting long, spindly shadows that reached for her as she passed. The stream itself appeared calm, its surface reflecting the sky above. But as she looked closer, she noticed faint ripples spreading outward, as though something unseen moved just beneath the water. Lara froze as a faint sound reached her ears, a soft, melodic hum, almost too quiet to hear. It was the same melody that had haunted her nights, now distant yet unmistakable. She stepped back, her foot crunching on the gravel, but her gaze remained fixed on the stream. The hum grew louder, and for a fleeting moment she saw them, pale hands rising from the water, their translucent forms reaching toward her before disappearing beneath the surface. The stream was alive, and it wasn't letting her go. Lara turned and hurried toward her car, her pulse thundering in her ears. The tires crunched against the gravel as she sped down the dirt road, leaving the inn and the cursed stream behind. But even as the trees thinned and the road opened into the highway, the melody lingered in her mind, faint and persistent, like a memory she couldn't escape. When she finally reached the safety of her apartment that evening, the unease hadn't faded. She locked the door and closed the blinds, desperate to shut out the outside world. Exhausted, she collapsed onto her couch, her bag falling to the floor with a dull thud. But as the silence enveloped her, she noticed something odd. A faint wetness seeped through the bottom of her bag, forming a dark stain on the floorboards. Her breath caught as she opened the bag, pulling out the water-stained page. The ink had spread, forming new words that hadn't been there before. "The stream follows." Lara dropped the page, her hands shaking, and backed away. Her reflection in the window caught her eye, and her stomach churned. In the glass, her face was distorted, her eyes hollow and glowing faintly, just like the figure from the stream. The hum returned, louder now, filling the room. It wasn't coming from outside, it was inside her. The whispers she thought she had silenced rose again, carrying with them the undeniable truth. She hadn't escaped the stream. She had brought it with her. As the light in her apartment flickered and the shadows on the walls began to move, Lara realized that her fight wasn't over. It had only just begun. And this time, there would be no running.